Dear colleagues,
Дорогі колеги, давайте розпочнемо наше обговорення. Ми хотіли би привітати вас у кризовому центрі Україні, і ми дуже раді тому, що ви знайшли час і завітали до нас. І я хотіла би висловити нашу подяку центру, який організував ваш візит сюди. І, будь ласка, хто... І також...
My name is Tetiana Garkova. I represent Foreign Department of Ukraine Crisis Media Center. Our mission is to provide objective information on what's going on in Ukraine. The topic of our discussion today is the European vision about what's going on in Ukraine. So we have 5 speakers, but I also invite everybody present in this room to participate in our debate. We don't have a lot of time, so I would like to ask our speakers to be brief and to be specific about their perception of Ukraine. And I give the floor to our marvelous moderator, Volodymyr, who will animate this debate, which I hope will be fruitful for everybody. Thank you for your attention.
Well, at least I'll try to do my best to animate it. Okay, and now I have 2 mics. Yeah, sure, thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'll be very brief. I would start right away with asking our speakers and honorable guests to give their impressions of their recent visit of Ukraine and perhaps elaborate on some of the expectations that their home countries have towards Ukraine and towards the way Ukraine should be developing. And perhaps we will start with my fellow colleague, a freelance journalist from London, Tim Judah, who was covering the war for the New York Review. Tim, if you could,
Thank you very much. I've been covering the war on and off for the last year, since the beginning for the New York Review of Books and partly for The Economist. And I've just spent 3 weeks in the East recently. First of all, about perceptions. I think that let's talk about Britain, which is my country. I think that the war has been relatively well covered in Britain, especially when there's been upsurges of fighting and when it's been newsy. The BBC especially has been present and done good work. To what extent Ukraine impinges on national consciousness is, of course, a debatable issue, especially since Britain has been, how should I put it, pulling away from European foreign policy in general terms. It's clear that Mr. Cameron has not been involved in the diplomacy which has been led by Merkel and Hollande. But by contrast, I have to say that Britain is the first country to have sent military trainers here, 35 military trainers to help in training near Mariupol. And you know, that says something about the British attitude, or the British government's attitude anyway, to Ukraine. And I have to say that another thing which has helped the Ukrainian cause in Britain has been the fact that the Russians have been quite famously now sending bombers down the channel off Cornwall, the tip of Britain that leads down into the Atlantic. That's been very well covered in Britain, has led to some alarm, and has basically reinforced the Ukrainian case in Britain.
Tim, but what about the expectations? What are the expectations in the UK towards Ukraine and the way how this whole situation, how the war should be resolved?
Well, I don't know if there's any specific clear ideas beyond supporting the Minsk agreement. I think that Britain would sort of definitely fall in and say, you know, this is what our colleagues have worked out, and let's work on that basis. Obviously, Britain would not like to see either the expansion of the war, nor would Britain like to see the complete isolation of Russia. But I think that Britain is quite sanguine about about what might happen, and I suspect that you know, I have no evidence about this whatsoever, but I suspect that one of the reasons, I think there are several reasons, that we have not seen an advance on Mariupol could be because Britain and others might well be prepared to go along with much more serious financial sanctions, possibly the cutting of Russia being cut out of the SWIFT system if there was an attack on Mariupol. I can't prove it. It's what I've heard. I have no hard evidence, but it seems to me, beyond the fact that much more serious defences have been built up around Mariupol in the last, obviously the last year, really, that this could be another reason why the Russians or rebel forces, or whatever you'd like to call them, have not advanced on Mariupol.
Understood. Many thanks, Tim. I will now yield the floor to another colleague of mine, a freelance journalist from Berlin, Ms. Gemma Pörzgen. Is that correct?
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, I'm a journalist from Berlin, and I would like to say a little bit about the situation in Germany. I think that in Germany, one of the main problems was in the beginning, when the protests on Maidan started, that there were only a few journalists around in Kiev actually to cover this, because we didn't have permanent correspondents here, just a few freelancers, and this situation has nearly not changed. I mean, now we have an office here, as you know, of Deutsche Welle, but I personally think that we are not enough present here with really correspondence. We had a lot of good coverage because people were sending out their correspondents from Moscow and Warsaw to report on this, but I think that's different because there are people coming in and out. And we have a lot of very good freelancers, especially, who are covering the war in eastern Ukraine. But I think the focus at the moment in the German coverage is very much on the war, and not so much as it should be, perhaps, on different areas in Ukraine as a big country, with also on internal politics in Kiev. So I would wish to see much more reporting on this. And we had a huge discussion in Germany about actually how to deal with this so-named Ukrainian crisis, where a lot of people actually think that it's a Russian crisis, not a Ukrainian crisis, so you can already discuss about this. And I think that even in the field of researchers who have mainly been, as I'm a political scientist, I grew up in Moscow, I always dealt with the Soviet Union, and later it was very much focused on Russia, and I think it's in a way very typical for a lot of researchers in Germany who are mainly focused on Russian politics as a so-named big player in the field. And I think this has really dramatically changed, and there has been a very interesting debate also in the field of academic circles, where actually a lot of specialists on Ukraine came out criticizing people who were too much focused on Russia. And I'm very hopeful that there's much more understanding of Ukrainian positions today. But still, I think that here in Ukraine, you need to understand that Germany is very much a country which lives from a history which the country was, as you know, occupied country for a long time. We were in between of the Cold War between the United States and Russia and the Soviet Union at that time. And I think, especially in the elder generation, you feel that this kind of stereotypes of the Cold War, they're coming back, and you have, especially in German talk shows, people standing up who are very prominent, like the Social Democrat politician Egon Bahr, or the former Chancellor Helmut Schmidt, who's 93 years old, who have a picture from the old century, and don't really understand that we're in different times with very different challenges. And I think that because of people like this, you have sometimes a tendency in German public not really to understand the Ukrainian position, but to be too much close, I mean, to positions of the Russian government. And I think there needs to be much more discussions on this topic, especially between German and Ukrainian NGOs and journalists and civil society. Thank you.
Thank you, Gemma. I would now ask Mr. Anton Bendarzsevszkij to give his point of view.
Thank you very much. My name is Anton. I'm from Hungary. I'm a journalist covering foreign policy issues, editor of post-Soviet department at Hungarian news portal, and I'm also the director of Geopolitical Institute of Russia and Central Asia. So I would like to start with the fact that Hungary has received a lot of critics from European Union, and I guess the perception of Hungary and Ukraine is also a bit ambivalent. Because of the politics, as we see that Hungary is trying to balance between European Union and Russia, and there was only 1 week difference between the visit of Angela Merkel and Vladimir Putin to Hungary a few months ago. But I would like to point out some factors which really limit the Hungarian foreign policy, and which really influence its decisions. But in the same time, I would like to assure you that Hungary is well aware of the issues going on in Ukraine, and in all its efforts, it tries to support Ukraine. So what are the factors? At least 4 factors. It's the gas dependency of Hungary, the building of a nuclear power plant, PAGEO, the situation of Hungarian minority in the south of Ukraine, and the politics of Eastern opening, the so-called Eastern opening of Hungary. It's a new foreign policy which was introduced after 2010. And it was at the same time when America also made this reset politics with Russia, when they tried to stabilize its politics with or its relations to Russia, and Hungary did almost the same. They tried to open towards the east. They tried to open towards Russia, Caucasus, Eastern Asia. It started after 2010, and this politics couldn't be stopped from one point to another. So when the conflict between Russia and Ukraine started last year, it was not an easy decision, or it was not really easy for the government to just make a 180-degree turn and stop all of the ongoing discussions and relations with these countries. On the other hand, the building of a nuclear power plant in PAGEO, as you may know, Hungary is expanding its reactors in PAGEO. They're building 2 more nuclear reactors. And they started the discussions of the company, or the country who's going to build these reactors already a few years ago. And when the crisis started, it was already announced that Russia was going to build these reactors in PAGEO. So it's also a factor which limits the politics of the government, because they have an agreement with Russia to build this nuclear power plant. And it's not really easy to just say, okay, we're not going to do anything with it. Then the minority, the Hungarian minority living in Ukraine, it's also an important factor because it really influenced the politics. Hungarian radical right-wing party, the Jobbik, it's winning positions in the last years, and they can play really well on the situation of minorities in different countries, especially in Romania and Ukraine. So it's also an important factor how the government have to present the defending of the rights of the minorities in Ukraine.
Anton, I have a question. So with all these factors in mind, and with, as you have correctly said, with the government being heavily dependent on Russia, what about the general population? What about the people of Hungarians, the ordinary Hungarians? What is their view on the situation here in Ukraine? What is their perception?
I think as a journalist, we do the most possible to cover really openly all these issues in Ukraine. So I think the population is well aware that the war is going on in Ukraine, and we have to do something about.
So I'm sorry, you said the war. So you are saying that this is the war in the media?
In the media, yes. We are trying to, well, maybe we are not so expressing so radically, but this is a war, of course. We can't tell it openly that Russia intervenes in Ukraine, but this is a conflict which is made because of Russia, so we can't deny it.
Thank you, thank you. Now, a question to Marco Di Liddo. So, what about in Italy? You're from Italy. Is Italian population aware that the war is happening in Ukraine, or the perception is that this is a civil unrest?
At first, I have to tell you and underline that the perception of what's happening in Ukraine in Italian population is very complex. Our public opinion is really polarized between two groups. The one, the euro enthusiastic, I may say, who with their mind and hearts are with Ukrainian population in this struggle to join EU, to join also NATO, and to fight this kind of Russian-helped insurgency in the east. On the other side, the Eurosceptical and businessmen and public opinion who still thinks Russia is a more important market, not only at the economic level, but also as a country, so culturally, because there is a lot of ignorance in Italy about Ukraine. Many Italians know your country only for Andriy Shevchenko, and unfortunately I have to say this. Unfortunately I have to say, but now is changing, because public opinion is understanding what's going on, and the problem is not the perception of public opinion, but the position that government will take about the crisis. Because in Italy, foreign policy is not a strong argument for the public opinion. The problem is that if the government will, in the future, will decide to help the path of Kiev to integrate into EU, I think our position will be much more stronger to your government. In the other case, if the government will prefer to save its economic and strategic interests to Russia, the position of my country will be much more Russophile. And so maybe in the international forums, my country could sustain a position of strong federalization of the country, or maybe in the most extreme, and I hope not so, case, the split off. This is, I have to say sorry if I am a little bit rude or unpolite, but I would like to show exactly what's going on in my country without be too much politically correct. That's the truth.
Thank you very much, Marco. And our final, last but not least, speaker, Mr. Corentin Brustlein.
Thank you very much. I will comment also on the French perception. I think, well, the French government's perception is really visible in the sense that France was very much involved into the Minsk II agreement. I think also I need to explain a bit how we went there, because of course I'm fully aware that the French position was sometimes negatively perceived abroad, because it took some time to reach that kind of position. Like all other European countries, France has to balance its interest between a lot of commercial interests with Russia that exist, that are less powerful now, but still exist, and a growing perception that Russia might or is becoming a threat again to Europe and to European security. So they had to balance these needs. They didn't know at first how strongly Russia would push into Ukraine, and honestly, I think they became prisoners of the vision that, like was said in the year 2000. That Russia is no longer a threat, that it is a partner, a strategic partner, and that we should cooperate with them like any other country. I think this perception has changed now. I think we can see it in the decision that have been enforced and taken by the government. We've seen that the sale with the Mistral has been suspended, that the sanctions have been pushed. What has been taken with the decision that has been taken is basically two-track diplomacy with, again, putting pressure on Russia to push them to withdraw, to reduce the implication, the involvement in Ukraine, and secondly, to push for an agreed political settlement, mutually agreed political settlement in eastern Ukraine. And I think that our most important priority is to be sure that both parties are fully implementing the Minsk II agreement, including the parts that were considered the most difficultly. I mean, it's a tough settlement, but that has to be done.
Yeah, but Corentin, a lot of provisions of the Minsk agreement are not being fulfilled. That's why the first Minsk agreement failed. That's why the second came in place, and these terms and conditions are not being fulfilled. How France is seeing that? Where does it lead Ukraine to?
I can't tell where it leads Ukraine to. I think that there's a lot of concern. I mean, from the very start, we knew that the Minsk II agreement was fragile, that its implementation would take some time, that any spoiler from any side could easily reverse the course of action. I'm afraid this might be happening, but honestly, I think France is ready to increase the sanctions if Russians push too far, like Tim said. I'm sure that the French government would be ready to consider increased sanctions in this regard. Now, regarding the Mistral, for example, I mean the sale has been suspended, but I see no decision coming, to reverse that decision, of course. And right now we're entering discussions regarding the penalties, so that we will have to pay to Russia because of that suspension. So I think the line is clear. It doesn't mean that the policy is easy. It doesn't mean that all of a sudden the solution is easy to reach. But the policy is clear, and it's a long-lasting one.
Understood. Many thanks, Mr. Brustlein. I now invite the audience for Q&A session. Any questions to any of our speakers? And I think there's a first lady in a nice blue white sweater. Yeah, and if you could please introduce yourself and who you're representing.
Yeah. My name is Katerina. I'm a journalist from Dela UAE business magazine, covering world politics and international relations. Thank you for your introduction and your comments. I would like to ask you a question. Many people here in Ukraine always say that in foreign media, journalists sometimes influence public opinion, by using specific terms describing the situation in Ukraine. I mean, when you say separatists, when you say rebels, when you say conflict instead of war, don't you think that using these terms, even though you provide some kind of details like pro-Russians and supporting by Russia, don't you think it diminishes the danger of the whole situation here in Ukraine? Thank you.
I think Emma wanted to answer this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you very much for this very good question. I think it's very important to discuss issues like this. In German media, I think the big mistake was to use the word referendum for what happened in Crimea, and I wondered how it came. I mean, because I saw nearly no newspaper who used a different term, and I think it was misleading for a lot of our readership to think that it was a kind of legal act. I mean, and there should have been other words, but sometimes it's also not so easy to find another word. Was it a quasi-plebiscite, or how you tell it? So we are always, as journalists, in the difficulty to find easy terms, as you know yourself as a journalist. But I worked in my newspaper from Frankfurter Rundschau in the newsroom at the time of the Bosnian War, and at that time we had a lot of huge discussions about these things, and I'm sometimes afraid that there's not so much time anymore today to have discussions, and also you see in a lot of newsrooms that you don't have so many people who are really experts on foreign policy, because we have a kind of media crisis where a lot of jobs fell away, and you see that the people much more sensible about these questions are sometimes the people working on the ground really being confronted with this. But I hear from them that sometimes they don't get through with their understanding. I think it was very important in Germany, for example, that you had at one time this term war, because the Ukrainian crisis was also a misleading term. Because in a way it gives a picture of a country which is responsible for its crisis. Therefore, I think there should be much more discussions like this on terms. But from what I haven't read a lot of Ukrainian newspapers here, but I saw that a lot of people are using the term terrorist, which I find misleading as well. So I'm not sure how much you discuss it here.
Just a quick point. I fully agree that the choice of terms, of course, is key. I think just as a complement to what Gemma said, I think there has been a cultural change in the past 25 years in Europe regarding war. And we very much refrain from using the term. I'm not talking about myself because I'm an expert of strategic affairs. So if I don't dare use the word war, I have no job anymore, basically. But I'm talking about, decision makers, journalists sometimes, but not the media, rather the political leaders. They refrain from talking about war. When we were in Afghanistan, we were in an operation. We were in a peacekeeping operation. It wasn't war, it was an operation. This is ridiculous because war has its own logic, its own nature, and we need to put the terms clearly to accept its consequences in the long term. So I don't have the feeling that in the French media there has been, a willingness to negate the fact that this was a war going on. I mean, I've read several reports talking about war here. Clearly not talking about terrorists, because terrorist itself is a connoted word, and we have other terrorist business to deal with, frankly speaking.
Sorry, just a quick remark. Yeah, war. In my perception, war is done between two parties, two countries, and even Ukraine don't use the word war in case of diplomatic relations to Russia. So Ukraine says that there is a war going on, but with whom? It's not officially declared that there is a war with Russia, right? So even as journalists, we can't really use this term as well. So we use, let's say, pro-Russian separatists and maybe hybrid warfare going on in Ukraine. But maybe it's a bit too strong to use war because it's not officially involving all of those countries.
Well, that's a very good point. But I would like to point out, obviously, the official term here is an ATO, anti-terror operation. My press card says ATO, so it's talking about an operation and anti-terror operation. But I think that there's also a risk of some delusion in Ukraine, because sometimes when I have said that there are elements of civil war here, which I believe that there is an element of civil war, however it was created, it was a Russian-provoked aggression, but it has turned into an element of civil war here. And then people attack me on Twitter going, no, it's not true. It's like, I'm sorry, there's an element of delusion here. So it's not just a problem in the foreign media, it's a problem in the Ukrainian media clearly as well.
I think we have another question.
Агентство DAO. У меня один вопрос.
DAO agency. My question is, does the European community think that Minsk agreements will ultimately end the war in Ukraine?
Are able to stop the war? Sure. You haven't spoken last time. Now it's your turn.
Yeah, no, I haven't spoken last time because I fully agree with my colleagues, and it's the same in Italy. in Italy, sometimes, try to ask to the question, we use, newspapers use war when they are pro-Kiev, I may say, and they use conflict or civil war or other smooth words when they would like more balanced or they are openly pro-Moscow. About the Kiev agreement.
Minsk agreements.
Pardon, sorry.
So they have Kiev agreements.
The Minsk agreement. The Italian political establishment hopes that the Minsk agreement could work because it is hurry and it is eager to re-establish normal relations with Moscow. Activists and civil society thinks that the Minsk agreement without a political solution will be just another little stop between two new waves of military operations. So the civil society hopes that the central government will and separatists will, or terrorists, or use the term that you prefer, will sit on a table and try to fulfill it, because war is not a good condition for all Europe, not only for you.
Tim?
Well, I would just like to say, in theory, the Minsk agreement is a political agreement as well as a civil war. In practice, it's probably more of a ceasefire than anything else. But the answer to your question is simply, it's, as we say in English, it's the only game in town. There is nothing else. So yes, they hope it's going to work. No one knows if it's going to work. But is there anything else? No.
I think we have another question from the gentleman.
Okay, thank you. I'm Petr Kolář, former Czech diplomat, now as a businessman doing a lot of work in Brussels with the European institutions. So it's more or less comment than question. There is a lot of confusion not only among the journalists, there is a lot of confusion about political leaders and among the civil servants, clerics in Brussels. And it's not only about the war or conflicts or terrorists. It's about money, how to finance it, and what would be the future of Ukraine if Ukraine should aspire or not to be the member of European Union, and when, what we should do as a Europeans, how to prevent the war to be more escalating, and so on. So it's not only President of European Council, Donald Tusk, and Madame Merkel, and President Gauck of Germany, who are quite outspoken and on the right side of the barricade. We have a lot of other politicians, not only from the extremist parties, but also some presidents and prime ministers of European countries, like unfortunately my president, who are confusing a lot this debate. And we have also those clerics in European institutions on lower but also higher level in different DGs, who will tell you, actually, it's going to be very expensive. Are we ready to pay for that? Are we ready to convince our taxpayers to pay for that? These taxpayers are voters, they are the citizens, they are voting their politicians. Would they vote the politicians who would promise them that they will pump your money, taxpayers' money to Ukraine? So it's very hard to explain sometime and somewhere that this is not the charity, and that this is the investment to our future. This is not only about you, that this is about us. So short time after our crisis, economic crisis, to use these arguments, you sometimes look like a lunatic. So you need to be aware of it, and this is the job of the Ukrainian young generation, sympathetic people who can speak languages, to go to Europe and to persuade Europeans that you not only deserve it, but this is because of us as well. Russian propaganda is very effective, and they know how to play their cards, and they do it really very well. So thank you.
If anyone wishes to address any of these comments. Yeah, I think we have some more questions.
Thank you. Bogdana Kostyuk, Radio Liberty. It's a pity, but young Ukrainian generation, those who speak English and not only English, are at the east of Ukraine, many of them fighting. My question is not a correct one. Ukraine is the only country in Europe where people were dying for European treasures at Maidan. The Heavenly 100 gave their lives for European perspective of Ukraine. At present, many Ukrainian patriots, pro-European people, are fighting for security of Ukraine at the east, so-named far Donbass barricades of Maidan. Do you think tomorrow President Poroshenko is to visit France? Do you know any information, or do you think the European Union earlier or later will agree to support Ukraine by special peacekeeping operation at the east of Ukraine? Thank you.
Let's try this one. Okay. I have no insider's knowledge about the French reaction to peacekeeping, the proposal of peacekeeping operation. I know the French army has a lot of experience in terms of peacekeeping operations. I'm not saying that we would be involved directly. I'm not just saying that our experience in terms of peacekeeping operations could bring us to be a bit skeptical about this proposal, because sometimes bringing peacekeeping soldiers in a conflict is a convenient way to try to solve it, but it's not, in concrete terms, when you look at, I look at the former Yugoslavian conflicts and how peacekeeping operations and soldiers were treated there, the roles they played, their actual ability to do something on the field was extremely constrained. And so I'm afraid that there might be some skepticism about what could be achieved through that. I agree that in principle this might help. I agree with that. But I don't know if the French government will see it. And in the end, it's all a matter, when you talk about peacekeeping, it's all a question of who's going to put its own soldiers on the field, okay? The main providers of peacekeeping operations are Bangladeshis, Pakistani soldiers that are not really willing to contribute to the political settlement, but are particularly attracted by the wages and peacekeeping operation in Haiti, peacekeeping. There's been a lot of problems with those peacekeeping operations. So, in theory, it is an interesting option. I think we have to keep in mind that it's not like the silver bullet that we're expecting. It's not the perfect solution.
We have one more response. I guess two more.
Yeah. I wanted to say something else to the first part of what you said. I personally understand very well that you are in a time of war and that there are a lot of patriotic feelings around. But I warn you a little bit that it's difficult in other parts of Europe sometimes to understand if you talk about European values as such a big thing and so on, because I think the perception inside the European Union is very different. I remind you on the boat, which we saw just a few days ago, drowning in the sea with 700 Africans dying because the European Union doesn't have a proper migrant policy. So that is actually what people see about the European Union as well. So there is a lot of disillusion in our own countries about what this European Union is about and what it is actually doing, and the way it is actually, I don't know, capable in doing proper policy. So I just would like to advise you, perhaps it's also not very political correct, but to be a little bit more cautious in talking about European values and that you're fighting here war for everybody and things like this, because I see a lot of Ukrainian, even journalists coming to Berlin talking that way, and I see that our public is very much irritated, and especially journalists, if they meet colleagues who are as patriotic as some Ukrainian journalists are who come, they feel that it's one-sided, yeah? Because they also try to understand the Russian side, which doesn't mean that they try to defend what the Russian politics are doing. That's something very different. But I think the job of journalists is to try to think about different perspectives and to put them into a very complicated picture and to explain this to our readership. And that's the only reason why I tried to point out these things.
I completely agree with my colleagues. And what about the problem of immigration and this new Dead Sea route that we have in the Mediterranean? This is a terrible issue that touched me very much because, you know, as an Italian, in many cases, our naval forces and our civil servants has to bring these people. I can assure you that this is something really touching, really strong. At the beginning, we tried to address this problem on our own with our mission, Mare Nostrum, but unfortunately, the current financial situation and also the political situation, the Italian political situation, doesn't allow us to go on, because we would like to bring this problem from an Italian side to a European side, because it's a European problem. About the peacekeeping mission in eastern Ukraine, I think that the problem are two, political and also linguistic, I may say. The term peacekeeping means that there is a kind of fragile peace that would have to be implemented. In this case, there is, I think, a low risk of new escalation of war. There is something different. At the political level, I think that my country, as Italy, in this moment would not risk a peacekeeping mission in which there is the risk of confronting Russian troops and so to transform a local crisis in a direct confrontation with the Kremlin. First, strategic level. The second is political. When you would like to organize a peacekeeping mission, you must have a strong political will to do this. In Italy, as I told you before, the public opinion and government is split. And if an half of the public opinion and an half of the government would not irritate Russia, I think that my representative in Brussels will vote no to a peacekeeping mission. And the third problem, I think, right now, it could be the position of Greece about all these issues. Because, as you know, we are confronting a clear risk of Greece as a new, I don't want to say the term Trojan horse, but in the fact is something like this, of the Kremlin in Europe. But I want to underline, Kremlin doesn't invent nothing and doesn't create nothing. Simply uses the traditional divisions within Europe. So the problem is not what the Kremlin does, but what Europe does not.
I would just like to follow up on what you're saying. I mean, it seems to me that for a proper peacekeeping mission, then there's got to be some sort of overall political agreement and political deal, in which case it would have to go through the UN Security Council. It would have to be signed off on by Russia. Otherwise, there's a risk that it will become what I think technically might be called a peace enforcement mission, which is actually a risk of becoming a party to the war, and in which case then there would be no chance, I'm afraid.
Well, that's exactly why Ukraine has requested the peacekeeping missions both from the UN and the European Union, because Ukraine knows that the UN, the Security Council, will definitely block the sending of the UN peacekeeping troops. So that's why the EU was asked as well. I think we have another question here.
Yes. But the EU is not a military organization.
Yeah.
Technically speaking, you can have technically speaking, that there have been kind of low-level EU peacekeeping missions in Bosnia, but they only were successors to a NATO peacekeeping mission, for example, in Bosnia.
And not opposed by Russia.
Exactly.
I'm Kristi Raik from the Finnish Institute of International Affairs, and I have a comment and a question. When you look at the positions, the statements of the European Union on this crisis, it's called crisis in the statements, it stresses the right of Ukraine to sovereignty, it stresses the principle of territorial integrity, but de facto looking at the countries in the eastern neighborhood of the EU or the West is not able to defend territorial integrity of these countries. You look at the countries that are the more, and where the more European-oriented ones, Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia, they all have conflicts that the EU is not able to do much about. This is the painful truth. And it also shows that this crisis is about very fundamental disagreements between the EU and Russia about the European security architecture, about the rules of the game. What does sovereignty mean? Do all European countries really have the right to make their own choices? Do they have the right to territorial integrity? And this fundamental disagreement is something that I don't see going away anytime soon, and I'm very worried when I hear comments from some parts of Europe somehow expressing hopes that we might be able to get back to normalization quickly. But my question is then, do you see that the unity of the EU, the fragile unity that has been maintained so far, will it hold, considering the different perspectives, different views on Ukraine and on Russia? And the next very concrete test will be in June, when the EU needs to decide on the prolongation of sanctions. Thank you.
So it's not an easy question, but the EU consists of a lot of different states with different national and political interests. It's really hard to speak about a common unity among these states. And I think there are three different blocks which have a different kind of policy. There is a Western bloc, middle bloc, including Hungary, Austria, and there is an eastern periphery of European Union, like Romania, Poland, and the Baltic states, which, and all of these blocks have a different perception of the threat imposed by Russia and imposed by this crisis in Ukraine. So let's say Romania, Poland, and the Baltic states are much more aware of the threat or perceive it much more as a direct risk and a threat, and that's why they want to do everything to stop Russia or to do anything against it. And the Western Bloc tries to stop the East to involve Europe in a war. I think basically this is the situation, and I think the main interest of European Union at this time is really to stop the next war, and to do it, as my perception, to do it in a peaceful way, not involving direct arms or military support, but to try to implement some peaceful solutions, work towards the Minsk agreement. As Tim said, it's the only agreement we have right now, and this is the only agreement which keeps still some kind of peace in the region.
Well, I'm going to make two comments. First, thank you very much for pointing out our contradictions regarding our own ability to ensure our own security. I mean, the EU is unable to ensure its own security, and we should say it out loud. I mean, collectively, the EU is unable to project military power and to use military power. And it is a fact that we have to live with, and that our Ukrainian friends need to understand, because right now, EU is not a military actor. And in the foreseeable future, this unity is really preoccupying to me regarding the use of force, regarding the importance of military power, regarding the necessity to increase defense spending. I mean, when you look at the evolution of defense spending in Europe for the past 20 years, it is catastrophic. I mean, we've been losing and losing military capabilities and relying more and more on the hope that the United States would come help us were something to occur to us. And the US is looking in the other direction and hoping that EU will take care of itself and that they will be able to rebalance toward Asia. So we're a bit trapped because we are out of the, I'm saying the EU collectively seems to be out of the military game, while US don't want to be the security provider anymore. And it's not, you look at Congress, they don't care anymore about EU. They say, okay, deal with your own problems yourself. So of course, a more assertive Russia might change that, but I'm afraid Putin is clever enough, to push and hold back, and push and hold back just enough to desensitize this question and to basically make sure that Congress keeps focused on its own business.
Just a quick remark, but EU is made along economical reasons. It's not a military organization, so in this term it relies to NATO in its own protection, and that's why I think that's why they're not. Actually, the Baltic states, Poland, they are increasing their defense spends because of the threat. But across Union as whole, it's part of the NATO, so that's why they rely heavily on the NATO.
I'd just like to pick up on your other point, mentioning the frozen conflicts in other parts of the former Soviet Union. I think that that's the way it's going in the East at the moment. And since those frozen conflicts that you've mentioned have already existed for a quarter of a century, there's no reason. We could suppose, perhaps, that this one, if it more or less freezes along these lines, which it could do, will still be there in 2040.
Any more comments? Yeah.
And I fear that the US commitment here could be, on the strategical view, seen as a trying, I can say, also to make Russia think on his western board without shifting to Asia also, and try to form, an X with China to contrast the US pivot to Asia. This is also a big strategic consideration. So I hope one of the problems in Europe is that I agree with you that we need to improve foreign and defense policy, because otherwise, if Washington comes to solve our problem military, but it's not only military, it's also politically. This is the problem.
But I think there is no military solution actually to this problem. I mean, and also the European Union in the last years has been a peace project. So that was the whole orientation. And I think that's a huge, how to say, I think it's a decisive moment now to rethink what the European Union is about and where it's going to be. But I'm still quite optimistic that in June we will have still the unity in the European Union towards sanctions and towards this policy, which has been quite successful in this regard, that it's pragmatic and realistic and tries to find a solution which is not a military solution. And I know from the foreign ministry in Berlin that, I think more than half of the capacity of diplomats has been to try to get the EU members together and actually to agree on what they have agreed. And I know perhaps from the point of from the perspective of a lot of people, it's perhaps not enough, and it should have been more strict towards Russia. But I think it's still a compromise where you saw a certain unity, which we couldn't expect even a year ago. I mean, we didn't have any European foreign policy, and it was not possible actually to get things together. And if you remind yourself at that point, it's much more than we could expect what we have achieved in terms of European unity. And there was a nice saying actually that Putin has been successful in uniting Europe or the European Union, and I think there's something in the saying.
Well, I think at this note of Putin being successful in uniting Europe in its fight against Putin, we will be wrapping up. I would like to thank our guests for your time and for your valuable feedback, and I thank the audience for the lively discussion. Thank you very much.